We all have questions. Questions like, why is it called a building if it's already built? Why is there no egg in eggplant? And do penguins have knees? But some questions are more important than others. This past Easter, we gave a survey to find your most asked questions. Questions like, how do I hear God's voice? How can I deal with difficult people? What does the Bible say about forgiveness and heaven? And what's the answer for all of my stress? Every week, we're going to answer your most asked questions and discover God's best plan because you asked for it.
Hey, well, good morning, Christ Church. It is always so much fun to be in God's house with you. I want to say a big welcome to our Ruston family. God is just doing amazing things in the Ruston community. So thank you, Pastor Jeremy and Dana, just for your leadership in that community. To our online family, thanks for joining us today. How many of you guys are glad to be in God's house? Amen. It feels good, doesn't it? You know, I want to say to our whole church family, thank you for just being such a passionate group of people. Passionate about the things of God. Passionate about the house of God. I mean, simply showing up every single week. Thank you. And then, in turn, using the gifts and the talents that God has placed inside you to serve His house right here at Christ Church. Thank you for your passion in worship. You know, it's electric. As soon as we start to sing, the room just fills up with energy, and that's because of you coming here, expecting God to move in your life, and as we press into His presence. And then thank you for your passion for people. You're passionate people about people. You know, 5 weeks ago, we launched into this one focus initiative where the whole goal was for us is just to kind of bring awareness to every single one of us that calls Christ Church their home about the people around us that may not know God, and then be intentional about loving them into the kingdom of God. And so I just want to say this morning, thank you. We want to celebrate you for assuming that responsibility to pursue lost people, the people that are broken, the people that are hurting, the people that are marginalized. So right now, can we just stand at both locations? Can we just stand up one more time? And I want us to celebrate every commitment card that was submitted last week, over 755 commitment cards last week, every name that was written on those commitment cards, and then the salvations that we believe that that's going to happen over the course of this next week. Come on, Christ Church, will you just lift up your voice and just celebrate this morning? We are believing for big things. You can be seated over this next year. And one of the things that we realized is that last week, some of you guys didn't really have your one yet. Some of you guys weren't even in service last week. And so today we want to give you another opportunity just to fill out a commitment card. They're in the seat back in front of you at this campus and at our Ruston campus. So we're asking you to link up with us. Connect with the vision here for this year about going after the one that's in our life. Some of you are like, man, I don't really have my one still. Well, why don't you go ahead and fill out the commitment card and believe that God's going to give you that one over the next couple of weeks. And let's just watch God do something amazing. Amen? Well, today we are kicking off this brand new series called You Asked For It. And in this series, we're talking about topics that you either needed or wanted to hear about via our Easter survey that we gave this past Easter. And this is something that Jesus did. Many of his messages were based off the content from the people that he was speaking to. And so over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about the things that you wanted to talk about. We're going to be talking about how to find God's will. What's my purpose? A marriage. How to forgive. Are we living in the end time? So we're praying that you're going to stick around with us. You're going to stick with us through this series. Maybe invite your one to be a part of this series. But today, we are going to tackle the number one questions that you guys ask. There was something like over 5,000 cards submitted this past Easter. And we had a great team that went through and shuffled through and wrote who wanted what, how many numbers. This is the number one question that you guys ask. And it's, how do I handle stress? And the funny thing is that I am the most stressful guy on our team, but yet I get to talk about how to handle stress. So I'm going to be talking to myself this morning. But as a show of hands, how many of you guys would say that your life is pretty stressful? Come on, be honest. That's pretty much everybody, right? Well, I hope to give you some principles this morning from the Word of God that will speak to that. But one thing that I do want to clarify before we jump into this is because a lot of times I think when we're saying how do I handle stress, in the back of our mind, we're really asking another question. And the question that we're asking is, how do I add more stuff to my life and still remain sane? Right? That's what we're really asking. We're wanting to know, how can we add more? And I'm probably not going to answer that one today, and I'll tell you why. It's because I believe that it's impossible to add more and more and more to your life, to continue trying to spin another plate in your life. A couple of weeks ago, Lindsay, my wife, came home from the grocery store and had a trunk load of groceries. Well, being the guy that I am, full of chivalry, I'm going to go out and get the groceries and bring them in the house. But being the guy that I am, I only want to make one trip. So I go out there, and when I got to the trunk, I realized this is a lot of groceries. So I did what most of us do. I stuck my arms out, and I started running those plastic bags up my arm. You know, I just started running my both arms. I got both arms full of bags from Brookshire's. And you can't really move your arms at that point, because if you go this way, they're going to fall off, and they're going to, so you're just stuck right here. Somehow I managed to get 2 handfuls. So I had both hands and arms full at this point, full of groceries. So I'm like, okay, I can't shut the hatch now. This is weird. So I shimmy my way between our cars, and I get up to the door, and unfortunately, nobody was at the door to let me in. So I'm trying my best to get the doorknob without dropping these groceries. I got to the point where I just couldn't do it, so I did the best reasonable thing that a person should do. I turned around, and I started knocking on the door with my head. Still, nobody was coming. So then I started getting stressed out, and I started getting frustrated, and I started kicking the door. Finally, my son heard me. He comes and lets me in. I get inside to only realize that there's no room on the counter for all these groceries. And let me just tell you, my shoulders and arms were getting tired. They're getting tired right now. And I was like, what am I going to do? So I just very gently made my way to the ground. And I had you can't do anything. It's got eggs, it's got milk, it's got everything you need. So I get all the way to the ground, one arm, and I finally get the groceries, and I shimmy my arm out from the little loops. And then I had to go back outside and shut the hatch. You see, I'd convinced myself of the concept that more is going to be better for me. You know, there's an old song back when I was in high school that was more money, more problems. I think it went mo money, mo problems. You could add to that mo stress. More isn't always better. Isn't it always better? It's impossible to keep adding more and more and more to our lives. Something eventually is going to crash and burn. And if we're not careful, it's going to be us. It's going to be you. If you go online, you can find a list of all these things that we as Americans, we stress out about. I mean, there's too many for me to mention this morning. Just wait. But you can probably guess which ones were at the top. Money was at the top. Money problems cause you stress, right? I think we all could agree with that. Deadlines cause you stress. I mean, some of you right now can't even stay connected to what I'm saying because your brain is constantly checking into what you have to turn in tomorrow. Or the 6 chapters that you need to read before class tomorrow, or the report that has to be turned in. Marriage, divorce, those can add stress to our worlds, can't they? Death of a loved one, work-related issues, performance issues, job loss, coworker issues, child discipline, parenting. Don't even get me started on that one, man. That will turn your world upside down with stress. What about the expectations of other people? I mean, that will stress you out, right? If you're wired like me, another one would be the expectations that I put on myself. I don't need you to cause stress in my world. I'm doing a dang good job of it myself. I'm stressing myself out. Here's a biggie that I believe brings enormous stress to our world. It's unresolved sin. You see, when you're trying to live straddling the fence with one foot on this side and one foot on that side, you're trying to live godly, but you've got this life full of sin that you're trying to hide, it will stress you out. That's why one of our core values here at Christ Church is to live authentically, be real, because fake is exhausting. Because trying to live a double life will stress you out. Look, and I wish that today I could give you some keys that could magically make all this stuff disappear, but God didn't promise that. But what God did promise was in John 16:33, and he says, I've told you all this. I'm like, okay, all what, God? All what? What did you tell me? Well, everything in chapters 14 and chapters 15. And this is, the setting is at the Last Supper when Jesus lays out and he tells his disciples what's about to go down against him in the next 12 hours or so. And he's telling them what they can expect to experience. And they have no clue what's about to happen to them. It's way worse than they ever thought. He's trying to prepare them. He says, I've told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I have overcome the world. In other words, Jesus is letting them in on this secret. Life on this earth is going to be full of trials and sorrows and chaos and stress. That's the bad news. But take heart because I have overcome the world. So while you're on earth and while you may experience a lot of these stressors, Jesus promises to help us grow through it all. In verse 33, he tells his followers, and I believe he's telling every single one of us today, I've told you all this so that you may have peace in me. I don't know about you, but I want some peace in my life. I want to live a peaceful life. And sometimes when we find ourselves in the most stressful moments, we just need to be reminded that there is a God and his name is Jesus, and he promises to be faithful and walk through us and give us peace as we're walking through this process of life. And the peace that he's talking about is this inner peace that remains unaffected by all the things that are going on around us. All these life stressors, you can still have peace in the middle of it. Look at your neighbor and tell him, Jesus, look at him, tell him, Jesus is your Prince of Peace. Some of you are saying, man, that sounds fabulous. I love some of that in my life. How do I get it? Well, Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, he lays out these practices that he put in his own life, and I believe that will help every single one of us as well today. So Paul, he's in prison, waiting on his death, and he writes this letter to the Philippian believers. He writes this letter to him, and in this letter he uses words over and over again like joy and joyful and rejoice. He found this incredible peace in the most stressful situation of his life. He is in prison, about to die. And so he begins chapter 4 this way. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. I'm thinking, how in the world are you going to rejoice if you know that your head is about to be cut off? I mean, how do you rejoice in that moment? I mean, we stress out if we're driving down the road and the guy in front of us is driving too slow. Many of you guys are driving around giving a half peace sign to everybody. You're so stressed out. You'll catch that in a minute. I mean, we get stressed out when our Amazon package doesn't show up on time. So how in the world can Paul say, rejoice, when he finds himself in this situation where he's about to die? Well, in the following verses, again, he lays out these practices. And the first thing he does, and we're going to go through them real quick. If you're taking notes, write this down. He says, say goodbye to worrying. Say goodbye to it. I want us to look at Paul's instructions. And then remember, he's about to die. Verse 6, he says, don't worry about anything. Don't worry about anything. You know that worrying is borrowing from the future? It's just borrowing from the future about some things that potentially may or may not happen in your life. Gil Martin, who's on our team here as a counselor, and he leads our Celebrate Recovery, one day in staff meeting, he said something that kind of just punched me in the throat. And he said, worry is temporary atheism. Worry is temporary atheism. I was like, whoa, bro, my toes are hurting with that one. I mean, but if you think about it, I mean, do we not believe that God's in control? That he knows the beginning and the end? I mean, Jesus wrote on in his Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6:34, he says, therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. And if you think about this, Jesus is commanding us not to worry. Have you ever thought about the fact that Jesus never commands us something that is impossible to do? And he tells us, don't worry. Don't be consumed by worry. Say goodbye to that junk in your world. Say goodbye to worry. And let me say this just so that we're all on the same page and you don't misunderstand me. When I'm saying this, say goodbye to your worry, what I'm meaning is it doesn't mean that you need to ditch your responsibilities or throw caution to the wind. It simply means don't allow your thoughts or your life to be ruled by fear over things that are outside your control. I mean, that's what we do. Things that we have no control over, we will just make it give us ulcers. Like worrying and fretting over it and letting it stress us out. Jesus commanded us, delete worry from your life. So where do we start? How do we start this process? Let me give you this idea. Live in today's boundary. Live in today's boundary. Here's the point. Develop the art of living one day at a time. Living one day at a time. Draw a boundary line around the thing that you're going to let concern you. If it's something from yesterday, it's outside the boundary. If it's something for tomorrow, then it's outside the boundary. It doesn't fit into what Jesus says. Jesus is saying, don't bring yesterday's grief and tomorrow's trouble into today's provision. Don't do it. Kiss worrying goodbye. Say goodbye to it. Second thing Paul tells us, have a little talk with Jesus. And I understand that some of you old timers, you're thinking about the song that we used to sing when I was a kid. And we're not going to sing that right now. But in verse 6, he says, do not worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. Prayer is a discipline that we need to put into practice every single day of our lives. Prayer should be a part of your life. When you find yourself in a moment to where you're getting stressed out, why not just stop and pray? Paul is telling us, don't stress out. Just pray about everything. If it's a job issue, just pray about it. But what happens? What do? We try to fix everything ourselves. We try to do everything that we're capable of doing ourselves. And then when we figure out that we can't solve the problem, we can't fix the problem, okay, God, I think I'll pray now. I think I'll pray now. If we're not careful, we'll end up letting prayer be our last resort instead of our first response. It needs to be the first thing that we do. Pray when you get up. Pray when you lay down. Pray before the test. Pray before the meeting. Pray about your boss. Pray about your coworker. Pray about your marriage. Pray, pray, pray. Somebody say pray. Pray. Don't worry about anything. Pray about everything. Then you will experience God's peace. Number 3. Y'all hanging with me? Number 3, think about the right things. Think about the right things. I think we all understand that every single day that thoughts, we are bombarded by thoughts all day long. All day long, we're bombarded by them. And if you're anything like me, then you probably carry on these conversations in your mind. I get a thought and I just start I work out this whole scenario in my mind. I see somebody do something and I start talking to myself. Are they talking about me? Do they not think I'm good enough? Do they not think that I measure up? And we're constantly talking to ourselves with these negative thoughts. Some of the things you keep, some of the things that you throw away. But one of the weapons that we have in our spiritual arsenal is the belt of truth. But if you don't develop it, it's no good. You have to develop it. And once it's developed, when these thoughts begin to hit us, we have the ability to say to ourselves before we entertain the thought, where is this thought coming from? Is this a thought from God? Is this a healthy thought? Is this an encouraging thought? Or is this a thought that's going to cause stress and chaos in my world? It gives us the ability to filter these thoughts. And when you get the answer, if it's from God, obviously you want to let it in. You want to embrace it. You want to think about it. You want to meditate on it. You want to maybe write it down. But if it's not from God, you want to feed that thought back to the sucker. Like, devil, you ain't giving me this thought in my mind. I'm not going to let this thought consume my mind. That's what the knowledge of God is there for. It helps us to be strong enough to say, I'm not going to take up space in my mind with a bunch of junk that's going to cause me stress, that's going to stress me out. I'm just not going to do it. Just like your AC has a filter to keep the debris and the dust out of your house and out of the system, you've got to make sure that your filter is working in your spiritual life. You need to make sure that you have a filter in your spiritual world. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people, spiritually speaking, that are living life without a filter system. They're just going through life and stress and chaos and fear and worry and dread are all symptoms of running without a filter. Here's the filter that Paul gives us. In verse 8, he says, now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Then the God of peace will be with you. Your thoughts will shape your life. And if you're not careful, that thought that you allow in and you begin to entertain, it will grow and it will grow and it will grow. And before you know it, you won't be leading your thought, but your thoughts will be leading you. And let me just tell you, unhealthy thoughts will lead you into some places that you never dreamed you'd be. Some places that you don't want to be in life. And worry and fear and stress come from thinking wrong thoughts. Number 4, be content with where you are. Be content with where you are in life. Verse 12, he writes, I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or little. If you'd like to unload a bunch of stress in your life, learn to love where you are in life. Learn to love it. Right where you are. Learn to love where you are. Trying to keep up with the Joneses and the Smiths. I don't know why the Joneses and the Smiths get such a bad rap all the time, but they do, don't they? Keeping up with your neighbors. Trying to live outside or beyond your income only causes you stress. It only causes you stress. Paul wrote to his protege Timothy in 1 Timothy 6:6, he said, "But godliness with contentment is great gain." It's great gain. Would I love a 2019 F-150 with a cap on the back, with a roof rack, so I could put a kayak and a mountain bike on it? Absolutely. Absolutely. But I'm content. Christ is enough for me. My identity is in Him, not in some truck. So just to be honest with you, I'm completely fine driving a 2011 Ford F-150. I'm fine with it. Love where you are in life. The last thing he tells us, he says, trust God for everything. Trust God for everything. You see, I think it's easy for us to trust God for our friends and for our neighbors. We can trust God for their healing. We can trust God for their marriage, for their finances, for their kid problem. But ask yourself the question this morning, do I trust God for me? When I get the bad doctor's report, do I trust God for me, for my healing? When my marriage is going through a slump, do I trust God for my marriage? When my kids seem like they are off the rails, do I trust God in that situation? I mean, I can't answer that for you. You have to answer that question for yourself. Paul writes in verse 13 and 19, For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. And my God will meet all your needs according to His glorious riches in Christ Jesus. Do you trust Him for you? For your situation? For your financial breakthrough? For your husband's salvation? For your kids' deliverance? Do you trust Him for you? You want to learn how to ditch the stress that you're going through? To walk a little lighter? To feel a little freer in your spirit? What does Paul say? Save about a worrying. Have a little talk with Jesus. Think about the right things. Be content with where you are and trust God for everything. You guys receive that word today? Come on, put your hands together.